Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to take another look at our P6 practice. This video is focusing on the P6 practice that attempts to read in a CSV file that is an inventory, perhaps for a small convenience store, a kiosk, or something along those lines. And the idea is that we will read in this CSV file into an array of structures, search it, maybe add something to it, maybe remove it, etc., and then ultimately export those results to another file. Now, again, your P6 may be a little bit different, but the idea is that the principles then can be used in multiple projects. Now, for this particular video, we are going to focus in on one function. That is our search structs by double. And interestingly enough, this function accepts what we are going to call a range of values. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at our products.csv to sort of appreciate what we are trying to do. If you'll notice that we have both a price and a quantity here that are numeric values. And the idea is that maybe you want to look for products that fall within a certain range of values. In other words, I want to look at things in my store that are between 50 cents and maybe $1.50, or maybe even look for things that are between $2 and $10. The idea is that I want to provide a minimum and a maximum value. And likewise for the quantity, maybe I want to look for values of my inventory where I am low on stock, or maybe that I have too much of. The idea here is that I want to then see this in a results.csv. So much like we did in the earlier videos, we are going to be looking at arguments from the command line, and we're going to be converting them into and passing them to the function to look at certain fields in our structures in our array. So to begin with, let's go ahead and look at the function itself, and let's look at the function signature. You'll notice that much like the other functions, it accepts an array of structures called search structs. Notice it's constant. We don't want to make any changes to that. It also accepts a field name, but it also accepts two values, a min and a max. In this case, it's going to be a double. And then also the indices. The idea behind that is that will reflect then the numbers or the indexes of the structures in the search structs array that match the criterion that we have for our min and our max. And then our n simply tells us how many search structures we have to go through. And then our m tells us how many matches we have. Now, if you have not yet done so, I encourage you to look at the string exact version of this because it is pretty similar. If anything, it's slightly simpler, but the process is going to fundamentally be the same. And so the first thing that we want to do is we simply want to validate each of our input arguments. And so to begin with, we're going to have an if statement that checks to see if our search structs are equal to null, and if they are, basically present the user with a prompt letting them know that there is a problem and that please provide a valid search struct. And then more importantly, we want to say results are then going to be equal to exit failure. Now, we're going to hopefully speed this up a little bit by doing a little bit of copying and pasting and a little bit of modification. Under our else if, then we have a little bit of compound logic that we want to use. The first thing, of course, is that our field name shouldn't be equal to null, and also that it isn't equal to 0, because there wouldn't be any point in us checking that. So what we do is we have actually an or condition here, and we check to see the string length of our field name. And if it is equal to 0, or rather, if either of those conditions are true, then we basically have a problem. And again, what we want to do is we want to communicate that back to the user And in this case, I'm just going to copy and paste and make a quick change to our error message. Now, continuing on with this, if I look at my else if of the additional arguments, in the earlier example, we were looking at strings. In this example, we're going to be looking at the doubles. And so fundamentally, then what we want to do is we want to make sure that our min is less than or equal to our max. Now, it's probably a little strange to think about a scenario in which the min was equal to the max, but essentially what that would do is that would allow for you to search for a singular value. And so what we want them to be is we don't want them to be we want them to be exclusive. In other words, we do not want them to be mutually exclusive. In other words, we can have the scenario where our min is equal to our max. And so the way that we want to check this is if our max is less than our min, again, we have a problem here in that error, please provide a valid min and max. And again, we can improve on this. As a matter of fact, we can actually provide them with their min and max values, again, for error checking purposes or additional feedback back to the user. And then the last thing that we want to check is that our indices, for whatever reason, ended up being null. And again, that's not a problem that we can really handle inside of this function because we're not dealing with any dynamic memory allocation. And in this case, then we simply want to say, please provide a valid indices. And again, exit failure. Now, under our else branch is where we want to handle then the additional values. And so what we want to do is we want to look at the field name and we want to verify that those field names are in fact part of our structure. And so what we'll do is we'll systematically and regrettably hard code these for this example. There are ways that you can get around some portions of this hard coding and some portions of this redundancy. But for this example, what we're going to do is we're going to check, again, using string compare I, that our field name, in this case, we're going to start off trying to match the price. And if that is equal to 0, then what we're going to do is we're going to search our structs dot price field. Well, we're going to continue this using an else if and our string compare I, again, against our field name. And in this case, we're going to use the quantity. And we're going to check to see if that matches. And if that matches, then what we're going to do is we're going to search our structs dot quantity. Now, at this point, that probably should start to bother you a little bit, or at least you should have a question, because if you recall, our quantity is going to be an integer. And for the purposes of this project, we're not really going to treat integers any differently than we will doubles. So in other words, you can just simply write this function once for double. And then what we're going to do is we're simply going to cast using the field quantity. We're going to cast and then compare the values as if they were doubles. Again, usually that might not be the case, but for this particular example, it's perfectly fine. And then under our else, then basically we need to let the user know that there was in fact some sort of problem. And probably the most logical thing to say is, please provide a valid field name in the structure. And again, you probably want to provide some sort of documentation for the user to follow. Now, let's take a look at what is involved in actually comparing one of these. Well, the easiest thing to do is to go ahead and create a int search index that allows for us to loop through each of the search structs. So what we can do here is we'll call this one search index, or index is fine. And what we'll do is once we've reached this far, we are simply going to reinitialize our M equal to 0. We're going to essentially say that we haven't found any matches yet. And what we will do is we will simply set up a for loop using our search index, starting off at 0, continuing with the search index up to, but not including our N, and then again, incrementing our search index plus plus. And then inside of our for loop, we simply check to see, using a compound condition, that the min and the max criterion have in fact been met. Now, let's take just a second to think about what this is going to look like. If anything, what you want to do is you can go back to one of your products and you can look at the price and you'll say, all right, I'm passing a minimum value of 50 cents or 0.5 and a maximum value of 1. So what we need to do is we need to check to make sure that the price is greater than the min and the price is greater than the max in order for it to be included in our results. And so very simply then what we can do is, again, with a compound condition, we can use our search structs, square brackets, search index. And what we'll do is we will look at our price. And if the price is greater than or equal to the min value, and if we're careful, we can actually do a little bit of copying and pasting here. And the search structs search index dot price is less than or equal to the max value. Again, you can see how we're including those endpoints. If those two things are true, let's make sure that we have matching parentheses here. We do. And if those two conditions are met, then we have found a match. Okay, well, what does that look like? Well, we'll come back to that in just a second. Under the else, we are just going to keep looking. Well, what does it mean when we have found a match? Well, that just simply says that we want to take our indices array. We want to use our M that keeps track of which element in the indices array we're using. And we simply want to store then whatever the value is for that search index. In other words, which element in our search structs matches our criterion. And at this point, then the only thing left to do is to simply increment our M. Now, probably could go ahead and stop here and test this, but we can also, while we're thinking about it, go ahead and do the one for our quantity. And again, this is a little regrettable because we will have to do a little bit of copying and pasting, but in this case, it's not too much. Under the quantity, the main difference is that we have to cast our price. And so the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and change our price to quantity. I apologize, we need to cast our quantity. And what I'm going to do to make this a little clearer is I'm actually going to break this up onto a couple of lines so we've got a little more room to work with. And then very carefully, what we're going to do is we're going to insert a casting for int. And then I'm going to go ahead and include a second set of parentheses right here around the entire field. I'm sorry, I'm switching this up, going the wrong direction here. I want to go from integer to double. And so what we want to do is we want to cast our quantity to a double before we attempt to compare it to the min value. So again, let me do this one more time. The first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and specify that we're doing a cast to double. And then we use an outer set of parentheses around the field itself to indicate that that is the field that we wish to cast. Now, truthfully, you could probably get away with one less set of parentheses, but hopefully this is clear to read. The idea is that I want to cast my quantity to a double before comparing it to the min or max. And now you can hopefully see why I wasn't too worried about combining those functions. Now, in some cases, again, you might want to consider this or treat these rather as integers. But again, for this particular example, treating them as doubles is perfectly fine. Now, what we can do is we can simply go back up to our main. Before we do that, let's go ahead and build it. Let's make sure that we don't have any issues. Little typo there. Seem to have accidentally put an additional semicolon. Let me go ahead and build it one more time. Looks promising. Now let's go back up to our main, and what we're going to do is we're going to leverage the same trick that I showed y'all in an earlier video. In other words, where I can call multiple functions. In this case, I have both a display products and a copy products. If you're not comfortable with this, you can simply do these as separate steps. That's perfectly fine. And what I want to do now is I want to look at the price and how I'm ultimately going to capture it from the console, because remember that we want to capture the min and max from the console. And we'll be doing the same thing, of course, with our quantity. And that's going to lead us to needing a couple of additional variables. And so what we can do is come up here to our main. Again, we're going to be a little loose with the integers and the doubles. So we're just going to start off with both of these being doubles. And then again, if we need to, we can revise this in the future, but we'll have a min and a max. And since we are getting them from the console, what we're going to need to do is we're going to use our A to F function on our argv square brackets 3, which technically we would want to double check. But at this point, we're simply going to convert then what was a string into a double. We do the same thing with the A to F, and again with the argv square brackets 4 to capture both the min and the max as strings from the command line and convert them into doubles. And at this point, then what we're going to do is we're simply going to leverage then the same process that we did before. We're going to import. We're going to import from the file products.csv. We're going to store that in a products array. We're going to pass the address of n, and if that is going to be equal to exit success, then we're going to continue on to the next step. Again, I'm going to use a compound condition here, so I'll need nested parentheses. We can't go on to the next step if we aren't successful with the first one. And so the next step will, of course, be the display of the products. Again, you can leave this out if you want to, because this is what is generating some of our noise. We can specify, or we specify the n, which is the number of products that we were successfully imported. And again, we check to see if that is equal to exit success. And if it's equal to exit success, then we move on to the next step. The next step is now to search the product, not by string exact, but by double range. We specify the products as being what we wish to pass to it. We want to specify the field that we are wishing to search. In this case, it's going to be our price field. We specify the min and the max value, the indices, just like we did in the earlier examples, the n, which corresponds to the number of products that were discovered by the import, and the address of m, which will correspond to the number of matches. Again, if all of this returns exit success, we simply move on to the next step, which is going to be to copy the products from one array of structures to another. And in this case, the copy products will copy from our products array to our results products array. If nothing is found, nothing is copied, and then ultimately nothing will be stored in the CSV file. We again provide the indices vector or array that will point to the matches that were found in the products array. And again, we pass the n, which is the number of elements in the products, and the m, which is the number of matches. And just like before, if all of this matches exit success or returns exit success, then we continue to the last step, which is to export the products. Again, in this case, we are going to go ahead and hard code results.csv, and we want to pass the results products and simply the number of products that we found matching. And again, much like in all of the other examples, if this returns exit success, then basically what this means is that we have been successful with calling all 5 functions, and we can just simply say exit or note successful, followed by a new line, and under the else branch, printf error, something went wrong. And again, that should have been clarified in an earlier message to the user. Again, you can modify these prompts as you see necessary. Now, before we attempt to do this with the quantity, let's go ahead and give this a shot. We may have some mistakes. We may have missed something. Let's see what we've got here. We do seem to have a problem either with some missing parentheses, or in this case, what do we have for a problem? Error called object is not a function. Ah, yes, I've done it again. Keep in mind that when you copy, you must remember to specify. Actually, 1 second here. Error object is not a function. All right, I'm not seeing. I thought I saw what the error was. Let's see if we can figure out real quick what it was. All right, so I'm going to go to my copy products function signature one more time. Sources, destinations, indices, N and M. So let's see real quick. So sources, destinations. I feel like this is right. I don't see my immediate problem here. Let's try this one more time. We're just going to retype this here in case we can figure out what's going on here. So products with an S, that is our sources. Our results products is our destinations. Our indices, and N and M. Exit success. Oh, I see now what the problem is. Actually didn't need this. Y'all were probably already seeing this as I was typing. I forgot my short circuiting operators here. In other words, my double ands. Sometimes, as you've discovered probably by now, is you will end up getting some weird errors when you're trying to compile that don't necessarily tell you what is going on. In this case, I just forgotten my short circuiting operators. All right. So at this point, then let's go ahead and go to the console. Let's give this a shot. We're going to clear our previous run. We want to search now by price. Again, if we don't put in a price, we get our help. We're going to do the example that I mentioned earlier. So we'll go to 0.5 to 1. We do successfully import, and then our results.csv. You'll see that I've discovered everything that was between 0.5 and 1. Why don't we try this one more time, because I'm a little bit cynical. My first run never seems to, or I like to think that my first run doesn't work. So we'll go from min of 1 to 2, 0.5, and then ultimately 1 to 2. And it looks pretty promising. As a matter of fact, we can actually do something like this as well. So let's do 0.99 and 0.99. And it should only show us the things that were 99 cents. And now hopefully you can see the benefit of allowing for the min and max to be exact. However, though, if I do something like this, I should see an error. Please provide a valid min and max, and then something went wrong. And then more importantly, I choose, at least the way we've done this, to not overwrite my results.csv. It's okay if you have no results, but if there was an error, do not overwrite your CSV file. Now, at this point, it's going to be pretty simple to modify this to quantity. As a matter of fact, all you have to do is simply copy and paste. And the only thing that changes is which field that we're going to check. And as again, what we can do is we can make sure that we don't have any other typos, but we can build this. And we can go ahead and run this again. This time around, we're going to do the quantity. So quantity, and again, I'm going to do a little troubleshooting here. You'll see that, or rather some error checking with my input arguments. You'll see that I don't have enough. How about if I look for items that I have between 0 and 10? And so if you look at your results here, you could see that I have 10 of many items. How about if I go from 10 or 11 to 20? You could see that I should have a different batch of items show up. I wasn't as creative with the quantities as I was with the prices, but I think you get the general gist of things, that you can go through now and modify your input file and test all sorts of different scenarios. And really the only thing that doesn't make any sense in this scenario would be is if you put in a reverse here, in other words, max and min, and again, you'll get an error message. So hopefully you found this video useful. This concludes most of the basic functionality in this particular application. I will be adding some additional functionality in future videos, but if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.